We're going to be talking about, should you only read white theologians? Why would we even ask that question? Well, you're about to find out. But let me start off today's shows by introducing you to quite a few books. You know I always like to do that. While I'm doing that, please grab this link and share it. And also, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Introducing Black Theology by Bruce L. Fields on Crossway. You're Grounded by Chris Lassiter on Moody. Tom Skinner, Old School, If Christ is the Answer, What Other Questions? Christopher Brooks, Urban Apologetics on Crago Publications. What is the Gospel by D.A. Horton on Moody. Tom Skinner, How Black is the Gospel? Old School, great stuff. A little bit different right here. Before Color Prejudice, The Ancient View of Blacks by Frank Snowden Jr. Black Atlantic Writers of the 18th Century, an anthology. Free at Last, The Gospel in the African American Experience on IVP by Carl F. Ellis Jr. The Decline of African American Theology from Biblical Faith to Cultural Captivity by Thabiti Anwele. Oh, I just messed it up. I'm sorry, Thabiti. Where Are All the Brothers by Eric C. Redmond on Crossway. Experiencing the Truth, excellent book by Anthony Carter, subtitled Bringing the Reformation to the African American Church. Anthony Bradley, Keep Your Head Up. Real good stuff. That's on Crossway. Same author, Liberating Black Theology, the Bible and the Black Experience. Defending Black Faith, Answers to Tough Questions about African American Christianity, Keener and Usury. One Blood Ham Wyland, Biblical Answer to Racism. DNA, Foundations of the Faith by D.A. Horton. Enduring Truth by Lavender. This is subtitled Restoring Sound Theology and Relevance to African American Preaching. Removing the Stain of Racism from the Southern Baptist Convention by Jarvis Williams and Kevin Jones on Broad and Holman. And last but not least, the Africa Bible Commentary on Zondervan. Excellent resource. Someone tell me how many books I just named. I'm not real sure, but not to keep track of books, but to help respond to an article and also a video by Dr. Paul Maxwell. I'm bringing on a close friend of mine, as well as someone I greatly respect and admire. Happy New Year to you, my man, Adam Coleman. Welcome to Street Apologist. How you doing? Hold up. Now, let me fix that. And let me make sure people could see your face. Boom, boom, boom. Welcome to the program. Happy New Year. Oh, hey, where's your picture? You don't have your picture up.
I don't?
No.
Oh, snap.
No.
I did something. Hold on, wait a minute.
This guy, we excel in professionalism here on Street Apologist Live. Way to kick it off.
Oh, man, my bad, bro.
There we go.
My fault. What's going on, man?
That's all right, man. So how you doing, Adam Coleman? What you got to tell people for 2019?
Oh, man. Well, first off, man, if you respect and admire me, man, you must not get around too many people, bro. I feel sorry for you, you know.
Maybe I need to.
I'm sure there's greater people that you can respect and admire.
Perhaps I need to read wider.
Okay, all right.
My experience, perhaps.
There you go. Perhaps, man. But yeah, I ain't doing nothing, man. Just kicking back already. Messing up my New Year's diet by getting this ice cream out the way here.
Is that right?
You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I'm knocking it out, man.
All right.
I haven't made it 24 hours. I'm already messing it up, but it's all right though.
Wait.
I got 364 more days to go.
364 more days to mess it up, right?
Right.
All right, hey man, for real though, Happy New Year to you. Thanks for joining, and everybody in the live chat, much love to y'all. I see y'all, and happy 2019 to you guys as well. You guys are some of the most faithful, active, energetic, educated people I know on the planet. But if you could go ahead and smash that like button, grab that link and share it right now, that'd be fantastic. I apologize for getting started 10 minutes late, but that was Adam Coleman's fault, everybody. So, all right, so let's...
It was.
Let's... Hey, man, you always got to be the scapegoat, man. That's why.
You got to, man. Got to.
But, it gave me more time to prep, so I ain't even tripping. Let's get right into this first clip. Adam, introduce your experience with this overall video, and then I'll play the first clip. You know what I'm saying? Like, how did you come about it? Initial thoughts, impressions. We're trying to introduce the audience to what it is.
Sure. Yeah, so, I mean, I know for myself, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion going on the blogosphere, Twitter, and really just in the body of Christ in general, in terms of some of these so-called social justice issues and the race issue within the church. A lot of people have things to say about it. So you've got a lot of talking heads out there. I myself am doing a series on it, on that sort of thing, on the Tru-ID podcast. So definitely, y'all check that out. You get a chance, the TRUID podcast.com. Also available on iTunes and some other things as well. But a lot of people have a lot of things to say about race, social justice, and so on and so forth. And actually, I was talking with you the other day, and you introduced me to this guy, Paul Maxwell. I wasn't really familiar with him.
Well, he's brand new as far as pop culture. He's been doing stuff at ETS and stuff like that. He's got his doctorate and stuff like that, and he's worked in the evangelical publishing worlds. But as far as coming out, it's recent. And when I first stumbled upon him, because I was just introduced to him. I was like, I don't agree with everything this guy says. Okay. But he's saying some interesting, provocative things.
Sure.
Even if I don't agree with everything he says, I think some of these things need to be said. So I appreciate someone speaking this way. So I was actually sharing some stuff that I found very interesting because I thought it was needed. And then he had to drop a video like this.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting because I did watch this video that we're about to kind of take a look at, but then I looked at some of his other stuff, and I mean he's certainly a smart guy. There's no doubt about that. He's not a dumb guy, and he has some very interesting things to say. I really appreciated his video dealing with the story of philosophy. I thought that was very interesting and helpful. So I mean, the guy's a very sharp guy, and it's unfortunate that he had so many lapses in maybe judgment and otherwise clear thinking in this video that we're about to critique. But you mentioned this video to me. I checked it out, and my initial reaction was, I really try to give people the benefit of the doubt and just hear people out. But there's certain lapses here that I just thought were truly unfortunate, and we'll get into it. I don't want to get too far now, but I appreciate the guy being candid. I appreciate him, addressing this issue, but just some things we got to dig into. So
yeah, and I consider you, Adam, to be someone who's balanced and somebody who I think always tries to be charitable, and so again, nobody agrees with everybody. It ain't about that, but. You're not Adam Coleman's not a reactionary, you know what I mean? And we try not to be that way either, you know what I'm saying? And so we're trying to do this in a loving, godly way, but at the same time be firm. I think he would respect that. Oh, shout out to OG Buddha Loco. You got the craziest name, and John Candy. John Candy as Barf is your avatar, so you get a lot of love, whoever you are. Thanks for the super chat. All right, so let's.
Well, I just want to say too. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's so important, I think, to be charitable in these kinds of discussions, and sometimes, honestly, I kind of feel like I'm tripping myself up because there are certain things that will happen in society, and having a platform, you feel like you have to respond to it right away. But then sometimes you end up kind of sacrificing on the substantive end of your platform, you know what I'm saying, in terms of the content you're putting out by reacting just kind of, quickly to things. So sometimes, some people just need to pump the brakes a little bit, think things through.
All right.
Yeah.
No, but for real, and your platform, everybody, please subscribe to the Tru-ID podcast. I've got the information on the bottom of the screen underneath his name, and be sure to check out blogs he writes because they're always thoughtful and delicious. All right, so here is the first clip, and I'm very interested in seeing the audience reaction because some of these issues I haven't touched on in depth with my audience, and so I'm curious to see even what the audience thinks as we get into some of this. All right, so I'm gonna switch over to playing the clip here. Give me a second here, ladies and gentlemen. It's gonna take a second to do the first one right. And Adam, you're gonna be hearing it.
Many blogs pop up.
You're gonna be hearing it through like my mics, which is not ideal. But just listen close, even though you've already heard it already. That way you know each one. All right, here we go. First clip from a video entitled "Why I Mainly Read White Male Theologians" by Paul Maxwell of Selfwire. Here we go.
Seen many blogs pop up lately that say top 5 minority theologians, top 5 female theologians that you need to read. I saw one blog that said even 5 books that aren't on white males' bookshelves or something like that. And I wanted to respond to this trend, which is essentially that I don't like it because most of the theologians I read are mainly white male theologians.
Now, he gets more substantive later, but I feel like Dr. Maxwell, you started off real weak. He said, I don't like it because most of the theologians I read are white male theologians. Now, I know you get more substantive later, but that's starting off real weak because that's not a good reason. Now, I understand later you get more in-depth, which we'll play, but right out the gate, I'm like, I don't like it because I mainly read this way. Okay.
Yeah, it seems pretty weak there. Yeah, I agree. And well, another thing I thought that kind of caught me was he talks about how he's seen this or that kind of in the blogosphere, and so and so blogged about this, so and so blogged about that, and it just seemed to me that he's responding to something that he's really not all that well acquainted to. You know what I'm saying? Like he's more so responding to the Twitter and social media, I guess, manifestation of what he believes to be a trend, but I kind of got off the bat, that he's not really acquainted with the underlying issues that have produced, what he believes to be this trend. So that's something that kind of struck me right off the bat.
Right, and the blog articles he mentioned, I looked around for those titles. I didn't look days on end, but I was not able to find those exact titles, especially from a theological perspective. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, and he might be paraphrasing. The only stuff I found that was sort of like that, I'll share real quick. This is on Mental Floss, 25 amazing books by African-American writers you need to read. It didn't have anything to do with theology, though. It was just like a literature type of deal. Another one that was on Huffington Post, which wasn't about theology either. 16 books about race that every white person should read. Now, that's not even exactly that type of thing. Another one on bustle.com. So these aren't theological websites. 10 writers of color we should all be reading because Toni Morrison isn't the only POC author in the universe. Another one that I found. Now, I did find one, and it was just nothing against Grace Cho, but it was, I don't think anyone really necessarily, I don't think she's that well known, but I found something that she said had a blog on the old white men on my bookshelf, thoughts on my first teachers, and she just said had a lot of the first authors she was exposed to were mainly reform folks who were older, such as John Piper and whatnot, and then just said later on she broadened her horizon, but that was not, I didn't seem like what he was really talking about per se. And then Relevant had an article called "Is Your Bookshelf Racist? The Importance of Adding New Perspectives to Your Reading." I wasn't really a great fan of some of the theological perspectives on this. It was short, though, and a lot of the books they recommended are not even books I would recommend. I mean, I showed some of the ones I would recommend in the beginning right there, but maybe that's the kind of thing he's talking about. I found one on Christianity Today by Brian Lorich. Shout out to him. My top 5 books on the Black experience in America, but that's not specific to anything to do with, this author is of this ethnicity. It mainly has to do with to understand these issues better, which seems legitimate to understand those issues better. So again, I'm not sure exactly some of what he's referring to. I have an idea of some of it, but it feels like we're in different worlds here.
Yeah, I agree. So I know fairly recently, and actually I forgot to. I'm not sure when Paul Maxwell released this video that we're looking at. I think it's recent,
yeah.
But so I recall Beth Moore, I think tweeted. I don't know if she retweeted an article, maybe it was her own article where she had something along those lines of like Black authors that that you should read. But I can't recall anybody other than that he might have seen, some maybe in the circles that he rolls in, that he might have seen where he'd be responding to. It just doesn't really, like you said, it seems like we're in two different worlds here, and even so, it seems to me that his interaction with this issue is primarily like internet based.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's, it's not, again, I just kind of go back to what I was saying before, maybe to put it differently. It just doesn't have like a robust, maybe interaction with what I think has produced some of these articles, whatever the ones he might have come across.
Yeah,
so maybe we'll get into that. Yeah.
When I end up talking about this, it's mainly I'm talking sort of like face to face with people about these issues, and I think that's can provide.
I've seen many blogs pop up.
Hold on, I think that can provide a helpful balance if some of them are actually in person. All right, here's the next clip.
trend of trying to create basically really it's to fabricate an equal opportunity, or not an equal opportunity, rather an equal outcome of balance and representation, essentially buying into an intersectionality mindset and applying that to your normative bibliography for theological inquiry.
I don't think it's merely a trend to produce some fabricated equal outcome. At least the people that I talk to about this, if they say, hey, read the Beatty's book on the decline of African American theology, the idea is become familiar with the history of theology within the black church in America and sort of the good and the bad and the high and the low. An important thing, and I bring up this book specifically, Mark Knoll, very notable evangelical historian, wrote the foreword to it. I don't think he wrote the foreword to this. Mark Knoll's not going to put his prestige career to write a foreword to just simply be like, oh, here's some tokenism for you guys. I think he believes in the work that the Beatty did in this book. So what did you think about that? Sort of right away he's saying it's all affirmative action. That's kind of what he's saying.
That's what he's saying. And so again, and see, this is why I brought up on the front end that there seems to be some distance between him and the meat of what's actually going on. And I think you begin to see it trickling in to his comments as the video progresses. So I actually wrote out his quote. I want to read it again. I actually took notes on it. He said, this trend to fabricate equal outcomes of balance and representation. Let me just get at that. First of all, just to kind of echo what you said, if that's what he believes is at issue, then he doesn't understand the issue. You know what I'm saying? Like, people are not saying that, look, we need to have this affirmative action as, later on he used the word tokenism, representation of black authors. What folks are saying is that, look, God has done a work, right? It's a work that transcends multiple ethnicities, cultures, so on and so forth. And there are things that people who aren't white have to say that are of value to the body of Christ that ought to be given a greater voice, a louder voice, not because just these folks are black or because they're female, but because they have something to say that's of biblical importance. I'm saying because they're saying something, that is beneficial to the body of Christ. And unfortunately, I don't want to skip too far ahead, but unfortunately, in this fallen world, the way we tend to operate, all cultures tend to prioritize themselves. That's just we all do it. You see what I'm saying? And unfortunately, what we want to do is we want to we have that infiltrating the church such that when we look at how we project ourselves to the world and we give credence to what people have to say. Unfortunately, there are some groups who are downplayed more so than others, and it's not even to say that it's intentional. I don't think there's like this group of white dudes sitting around in some ivory tower somewhere plotting on how to silence black theologians. But it's just a matter of the fact that what we're saying is, hey, there's some folks out here who have something to say, and we would do well to listen to them. And part of the reason that we don't listen to them is because they come from a different cultural starting place. I think that's what, in essence, what people are saying. But it seems to me that he kind of strung together a couple of words just for the sake of, I'm not going to say just for the sake of sounding sophisticated, but maybe just to throw some buzzwords like intersectionality. I don't see how intersectionality has anything to do with why people are saying that we ought to, give heed to some of these non-white voices. I don't know where he's getting that from. The only thing I can surmise is that intersectionality is a buzzword now in these, recent conversations, and maybe he felt he needed to throw that in there. You know what I'm saying? Just, for the sake of it. But I don't see how in any way this has anything to do with buying into some intersectionality mindset. I'm now, granted, maybe we're taking for granted that people understand what intersectionality is. What he's referring to is this notion that if you have individuals who occupy different statuses of having been oppressed, like, if you're black and you're a black female, maybe you've experienced more oppression than a black male because you're black and a female, and all these kind of oppressive categories can come together, and some people are more oppressed than others because of that. That's kind of what he's referring to with intersectionality, but I don't see how at all, that's, applicable to, what people are saying about valuing non-white sources. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, maybe you came away with something different from that, but that's kind of what I'm seeing though. I don't see where it's going there.
Yeah, I do have something to say, but let me save it so we can interact with each clip individually. And this
trend
right here
of trying.
Well, can I just say something real quick though? Just as a kind of, I know I keep jumping in and
Number
cutting you
one.
off. I apologize, but I just want to just throw this in. Like, one thing I would say is like, just because you have a platform doesn't mean you have to respond to everything. just because you feel like your fan base might want to hear you talk about something, or that you can grab more subscribers by talking about a particular issue, doesn't mean you have to speak on it. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's kind of, that may be where he.
Yeah, I agree, but I think my view is it's more organic than that. I think there's a quadrant of the web, and then it includes sections of evangelicalism that feel very tired of being beat upon with all these kind of radical leftist ideas that began with some secular prof in a university and have trickled down a lot of times almost without questioning the assumptions behind them into evangelical academia and then the trend in the larger culture to an extent. And I feel like there's sort of a knee-jerk reaction, and sometimes they lump things together that shouldn't be lumped together when they're just kind of like, I'm sick of it all, and here's my kind of intellectual rant on this issue. I think it's organic, and I think some of his impulses towards some of these things are correct, but I think this is an area he's way less versed in than he actually thinks. And so I'm hoping that this discussion would give him, or people that watched this video and said, hey, right, a pause and a chance to do a second look at these issues. Here's the next clip.
Number one, the idea of a race-specific theology that doesn't make material claims about race suffers from categorical ambiguity. Okay, so there's no such thing as a white theology. There's no such thing as a black theology. You can have feminist and Marxist theologies. You can even have racist theologies that explicitly teach that certain races are inferior to others.
All right, so part of what he seems to be saying in there is that since theology is about ideas, there's no such thing as a white or black theology, especially when it's not touching on the areas of ethnicity. I think that's what he's getting at. So he's just challenging the category of the idea. And I do think if someone uses the term black theology, it's good to try to begin to define what you mean, and I hardly ever do see that happen. So I'm going to agree with sort of, I'm trying to take a charitable reading of these things. This is not just disagreeing for the sake thereof. But I don't know, thoughts on that clip, or thoughts on that impulse or whatever, Adam Coleman, anything?
Well, I mean, well, first of all, let's talk about, like, what is he, when he says theology, what does he mean? What is he referring to when he's talking about just theology in general, right? It seems to me that for the most part, throughout this video, he's referring to theology kind of in a way that leans towards it being like propositional knowledge. You know what I mean? It's like this set of ideas and truths that Christians ought to adhere to, right? But theology is much more than that, right? We were a couple of years ago, we was at Frequency conference, and Dr. Carl Ellis talked about, actually, you shot him out a minute ago with the Free at Last book, right? He talked about how theology, two broad branches, we could say, is orthodoxy and orthopraxy, right? So orthodoxy is going to be the branch of theology that deals with that propositional knowledge, the things that we ought to believe. But then you have orthopraxy that deals with the things that we ought to do, as followers of Christ, and that includes ethics and so forth. So with that being said, when he's talking about theology, of course, there's no propositional knowledge, there's no orthodoxy that is contingent upon somebody's race or, grounded in a race or anything like that. However, when we're talking about orthopraxy, that other branch of theology, right, and we're getting into ethics and things of that nature, just from a philosophical standpoint, there are elements of ethics and ethical discussions that have to do with personal experience. There's a such thing as procedural knowledge. We're talking about, what it means to know something that intersects with ethics and how we live ethically. And that certainly, has to do with, one's experiences. And the fact of the matter is, it certainly can be the case where, based upon somebody's background, culture, maybe some shared history, there's some things that they're experientially in contact with that other people aren't. So when you look at a lot of black theology or black authors writing about theology, there is this there's a substantial amount of content that has to do with ethics, morality, certain historical occurrences that have moral implications, right? And in some instances, absolutely, you're gonna have some perspectives coming from that vantage point that you're not going to find among for the most part among white authors. That's just a fact of the matter,
and mainly because it has to do with culture and,
right,
and experience. And the deal with that is that does inform what issues you tackle, what issues you have awareness of. And I'll give you an example of that. When it comes to ethics books written by evangelicals, to my knowledge, as far as the major ethics books, I've seen very little done in the way of the issues of bigotry, prejudice, ethnocentrism, what people will call racism, supremacy, those types of things by and large. Whether a person agrees with everything Dr. Grudem has ever written, I'm not talking about all that, but one thing that I found interesting was this new book on Crossway, this book, Christian Ethics, which I actually do recommend. Again, I can recommend something without co-signing 100% or the author, but shout out nonetheless, An Introduction to Biblical Moral Reasoning. He has the sections in here on those issues that are helpful. Now, do I wish it could have been more extensive and other things wouldn't have been tied in? Maybe, yeah, okay. But why hasn't that been tackled? Imagine if in the 1800s, books dealing with ethical issues by folks within the evangelical tradition would have tackled that and been less afraid to deal with slavery. I'm not saying no one ever did, but certainly that was an issue that people did not, by and large, have as much courage, I'll put it that way, on the issues they should have. And a lot of times they didn't even have the right thinking on the issue in the first place anyway. And so that's a real issue. Are there exceptions? Okay, yeah. But I mean, for example, my man over there, of course, in London, Charles Spurgeon, he had talked about this. He was a harsh abolitionist in the sense of like, let's do this for real. Had relationships, close bonds with black folks himself, etc., etc., etc. And basically was banned from speaking in the U.S. by and large. Death threats, all that. It's an interesting thing to read up about that because he took a strong stand. So there was definitely a cost that people counted to do that. So these ethical books a lot of times have absence or holes or gaps. And it doesn't need to be out and out racist. And we're not even saying leaving it out as a racist. We're more kind of saying there's blind spots that a lot of times can be filled in. And we're just saying, let's see with 2020 vision and if this can help us do it. Now, again, not agreeing with every little thing, but this is a good book on Baker Academic, Introducing Black Theology by Bruce L. Fields. He says black theology seeks to make sense of the socio-historical experience of African Americans in light of their confession that God has given revelation in Jesus Christ. This revelatory act makes possible the conviction that the struggle for justice is consistent with the gospel. Now, that's some dope stuff. That's some good stuff. I think if a person wants to find it that way, I think it's good. Now, it's sort of maybe a strange thing that it gets limited to, like, black theology. It gets limited to the American continent, but that's sort of where a lot of it ends up being at for whatever reason, and I think we can work through those issues as well. But I just...
Well, if I can just come back on that, I mean, just to kind of bolster your point, I think that you hit the nail on the head. So that's the thing, is that you have these moral issues, these ethical issues that aren't being addressed in a number of words because in some instances folks just didn't have the courage to do so or lack the awareness or so on and so forth. And so that's why I said earlier on when he says that there's no such thing as white theology, well, yeah, I agree, in terms of like this propositional knowledge kind of aside, but when you're dealing with ethics, which is certainly a viable branch of Christian theology, you do have this area of theology that certainly intersects with the experiences of individuals and groups. And it's a legitimate, branch that like, again, we have a number of writers, addressing, and it kind of reminds me of Ephesians 3. I know 3:18, I think it is, or maybe it's 3. I know I'm going to misquote it, but it talks about how we ought to comprehend with all the saints the breadth and the height, and so on and so forth, the love of Christ, and I think that's essentially the spirit in which people are saying, hey, we need to check out these other authors. There's this community of believers. And part of that community, for reasons that are totally ungospelly, if that's a word, haven't had as much of a say, and we need to hear from the entirety of what what the bride of Christ has to say on this or that.
Ephesians 3:18. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Now, Adam Coleman, I got to tell you something, though, man. You said intersect like 3 times. They're going to get at you, bro.
They're going to give me the intersection. There it is.
See? But let's go to the next clip. And, Adam, I think we're going to have to do some shorter responses on these clips, or we're never going to get all these clips. And here's the 4th clip. And I think this is a clip, if I'm not mistaken, where he brings up R.L. Dabney, and he gives a specific instance of someone who was, Southern Presbyterian Reformed, he was a Calvinist, who didn't just do systematic theology, but did integrate directly his racism into his theology. Not everyone did that, but some did, and you can find extensive defenses of slavery from trained and accredited ministers if you just go through the literature of the antebellum South. It's easy to find, and even sometimes among the Northerners and abolitionists, the things they would say are not quite as enlightened spiritually or gospelly as you would hope. With that, I think I play this next clip. It's either this one or the next one. It's the Dabney clip, but let's hear this either way.
Robert Louis Dabney, Southern Presbyterian theologian, he said in a speech before the Synod of Virginia, 1867, he said, quote, "An insuperable difference of race, made by God and not by man, and of character and social condition, makes it plainly impossible for a black man to teach and rule white Christians to edification," end quote. That is Robert Louis Dabney. That's racist theology. That's immoral racism, right?
All right, so he gave an example there, and I did a little bit of research after hearing that clip, and I found more stuff by Dabney, and boy, you can find a lot worse stuff that Dabney said. One great article is on desiringgod.org. I'm going to drop the link in the live chat, and it's a good little article called "Providence is No Excuse, Exposing a Reformed White Supremacist" by Daniel Cleveland. Of course, Desiring God is a Reformed ministry, but they're like, listen to this, and let me just read one thing, man. Why'd you got to say this?
Snap.
Yeah, this is in, just listen to this. Thus, this is a Dabney quote. I don't even want to read this, man. Thus, if the low grade of intelligence, virtue, and civilization of the African in America disqualified him for being his own guardian, and if his own true welfare and that of the community would be plainly marred by this freedom, then the law decided correctly that the African here has no natural right to his self-control as to his own labor and locomotion. What it's saying there, since these black dudes can't control themselves and are decidedly inferior, it's right to keep them in slavery. Amen. The Bible says so. That's what he's saying there.
Wow.
And that's
it's very interesting. And it's interesting because there's a subtle, I think, undertone of Enlightenment thinking in there too, where he's kind of basing that personhood on their self-governance and certain attributes that from the Enlightenment period they would have held up as being evidence of personhood and so forth. So you kind of see this infection of ideas outside of Scripture informing his interpretation of what God actually has to say about personhood and the African and so forth. But I mean, it's just like you said. I mean, you don't have to look all that hard to find passages like that. There's a guy. Was it Henry Knoll or something like that? He's got, oh man, it's going to mess it up. But he's got this whole book about the theological struggle that, in a sense, precipitated or maybe undergirded the Civil War. It's a really great book. I don't know why I can't think of the title right now, but he talks about how there's this tug of war. You know what I'm saying? But theologically, between folks who were on different sides of the slavery question or African personhood question. And obviously, Dabney was on the wrong side of that. of that debate. But with that being said, like,
hold on, Adam.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned Dabney specifically, I've got to do this again. I don't want to do this.
Okay.
So, but I need to do this. So, everyone, just so you know, number one, the video that Dr. Maxwell put out was not saying you should only read white male theologians. I titled mine so people would pay attention, and I think it kind of puts it to a point. His is Why I Mainly Read White Male Theologians. That's his title. December 9th, 2018 at Selfwire. Has, as of now, 2,300 views. There's 40 comments on it, including an excellent commentary by Dr. Anthony Bradley. Kudos to you, Dr. Bradley, on your comment. You nailed it with that. And I'm going to read 2 quotes, and I'm not saying that, I'm repeating, that Dr. Maxwell would agree with these comments, but I do need to read them right now. Texas Refo, 1 week ago, you should be ashamed of yourself, said, Dabney did nothing wrong. Then I go down a little bit, and I see Todd Mahaffey. And listen to this, it's worse. Todd Mahaffey says, this is a comment on the video. I'm going to go ahead and dislike it right now. Robert Louis Dabney was right. To be racist, an ambiguous Trotskyan epithet, Dabney would have needed to tell us that he hated Negroes.
Wow.
Okay, so, yeah. Now, again, no one's saying here that Dr. Maxwell co-signs those. In fact, he said it was sinful what Dabney said, so he does not.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how much he curates his comments, but maybe just consider, deleting those too. I'm just saying it might help the video look a little better, but hey, whatever. But go ahead and make your next point, but make it short because I got to this next.
Yeah, I'll make it short. Well, again, I just want to reiterate too. I mean, obviously, Maxwell denounced Dabney's statements as being, explicitly racist, right? But I just want to say that for the most part, I don't think people are making the argument that white theologians are being explicitly racist. I don't think that's an issue at all.
No.
I think that
as far as where we're coming from and what we're hearing, that's what.
Right.
That's what. Not what. Yeah. So yes, go ahead. My bad.
Yeah. So that's not the issue. You know what I'm saying? So if people were saying like you guys are being explicitly racist, then yeah, they'd be wrong about that. But that's not what the issue is. The issue is, I think some people feel like, okay, well, if we're not being explicitly racist, then we're in the okay zone. Stop whining and complaining.
Yeah.
I think where people are coming from is that that's not sufficient, right? What's sufficient is let's let the full corpus of what God's body have to say, be accessible, be heard, be valued, amongst his people. And currently that's not happening. Currently, it seems as though that the church is taking its cues in terms of what's important and what's valuable from the world. And in the world, we're following again. So I don't want to go too long. You told me made my comment short, but I'll just leave it at that.
Nah, that's good. All right. Somebody in the live chat just said, "Is the guy
Robert Louis,
Dr. Maxwell?" And the answer is yes. And here is the next clip from the video that we are interacting with. Here we go.
the notion that when a white theologian talks about the Trinity, well, then that's white Trinitarianism, that it's both racist and conceptually absurd. Okay, so the Nazis used this category as a means of attacking Einstein and his Einsteinian physics, and even as a means of critiquing Freudian analysis in the mid-20th century. They called these concepts such as Einsteinian physics and Freudian psychoanalysis, they called them the Judiswissenschaft, the Jew science, right? And those who decry white male theology use the same philosophical category, and it is racist, which is to say that you predicate a racial quality to a particular concept proposed by a speaker or thinker or writer based only or merely on the skin tone of that speaker or thinker or writer.
Adam Coleman, I'll let you crack at it, homie.
Well, just two real quick points. I mean, first of all, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. I think he's aiming at a straw man. I don't think that the discussion today is about people saying, "Oh, well, we're not going to rock with the Trinity because white people wrote about it," or
hold up. Yes.
Unless they're Israelites, maybe. But
yeah. So this is what's interesting is there are lines of attack upon Christianity that do some of what he's saying, but it's a cult like the Hebrew Israelites. some of them, as well as the Competence, sometimes will say things like the Trinity is a white European or Greek concept. They'll say something like that. And so I believe in contextual apologetics, meaning responding to the problems and arguments given to you as you function and thrive in the community. So I hear this. I specifically wrote an article actually on this exact topic, which was in a book. It's in a book that just came out late last year called Our God is Triune, edited by Michael Burgash Jr. And in that book, I talked about ante-Nicene writers on the Trinity, because that's another charge about Nicaea, is also people from the continent of Africa or non-European context writing on the Trinity, not because I view the truth value based upon the geographical location of the writer, but because I'm doing contextual apologetics. Part of what I'm saying is I don't agree with your presupposition, but even if it was even let's see, is the Trinity sort of a white thing? All of that, showing how it's not. Now, of course, we go back further when we get into the scriptural essence of it, and it's Hebraic, is because it's revealed by God to his people as far as the writers, but the idea is just divine. The idea is divinely revealed by God to his people. And so, as far as that goes, that's true. If somebody's going to say that I don't believe in Trinity because it was put up by white guys, but here's the thing: people should be aware that people do. There are cultists who say things like that, but I don't. The people we're interacting with that are serious aren't saying stuff like that.
No, not at all. I mean, and Christians. I mean, you're not really going to get that from too many Christians, I don't think. So I just, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it just seems to me like he doesn't know what he's talking about in terms of where these types of concerns are coming from. You know what I'm saying? So if he feels like what's the issue is people are discounting Christians anyway, are just casting aside certain points of theology, core doctrine, what have you, on the basis that certain authors are white. It just seems to me he doesn't know what he's actually even contending against. Does that make sense? Or
and that's what the Anthony Bradley comment is. I'll just read a little bit of it. The title of this video ought to be How to Make a Straw Man Argument. The logic is so fundamentally flawed and the content arrayed so uninformed that it's hard to know how to respond. There actually is a such thing as black theology, and it was not merely a political ideology. Aspects of it are a political theology, yes, but it's so much more than that. It's obvious he has not read all of I always mess up his first name, Diotis Roberts or James Cone's writing. Yes, all of it. Dr. Maxwell means well in this video. And so there, he's being charitable. It's obvious that he has not read all of I'm just repeating myself there. He's a product of evangelicalism's tribal, anti-progressive bibliography, which is often no less culturally constrained than those on the left. Interesting point. Jordan Peterson would give a strong rebuke to Dr. Maxwell's proposal for his mainly tribal bibliography. It's a pathway to ignorance. Dr. Maxwell's conclusion is something the reformers and reform scholastics would ever recommend by employing his reactionary logic. I think he meant never, but I think it says ever. By the way, the reason why Anthony Bradley brings up Jordan Peterson is because Dr. Maxwell has said that that's his hero, and so he's saying that your hero would disagree with what you're saying there. And let's look now at the
notion that when a white theologian talks about
hold on, I'm getting to the next clip. All right, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Next clip.
Number 3, the concept of white theology isn't just a categorical analog of Nazism, which it is. It's also a logical fallacy called the genetic fallacy. So a speaker is guilty of the genetic fallacy when he sees an idea or author as untrustworthy, specifically because of the race or origin of the idea. So to say that an idea is suspect because the speaker is white, or to say that the speaker's whiteness has conceptually infected the idea somehow through osmosis, that's a logical fallacy. And the inability to perceive this fallacy in the very category of white theology is an inability to accept the constraints of the rules of rationality.
True enough about the genetic fallacy. If we're going to say because someone's a certain color or whatever, that what they say is more false or more true, that's a problem. The Hebrew Israelites do that all the time. You'll read a book by a scholar and the Hebrew Israelites, but see, he's not talking about Hebrews like cultists. They'll say, I bet that was a white author, even though, of course, they quote white authors all the time when it suits their purpose, but that's not who he's talking about. And so it's kind of like, what ghosts are you fighting here a little bit? And it sounds like he's mixing like radical, way left, because some of this does exist, what he's saying, with sort of evangelicals who are just advocating sort of a broader palette, a broader, you know what I'm saying, toolbox or something like that. It's he's not taking the evangelicals at their best, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's, I think his genetic fallacy point is just misplaced. Again, it's another straw man. It doesn't seem like he knows what he's talking about. But aside from that, I mean, there's really nothing about suggesting that you read more, let's just say, black authors. There's nothing about that has anything that implies that white authors are infected, or that there's something that's infected their material or anything like that. It's just we're saying read more black authors. It's really that simple.
Well, let me ask you
so
this.
I don't know why
Adam Coleman. Why does Dr. Paul Maxwell need to read more black authors though?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Now, if we're talking about the Trinity, we're talking about, some of this propositional stuff, maybe you don't. You know what I'm saying? Just read who you read. But when it comes to what God has to say to his people, the fact of the matter is God does articulate what he has to say through the lens of culture at times. I'm saying, look at the Bible, right? If you want to understand the Bible, it's probably a good idea that you understand the culture, of Hebrew people, and you understand, what events were going on at such and such a time, and it can, illuminate what God is, projecting through the text. They're trying to communicate to his people, right? So culture is a valuable, lens that sometimes God would have us employ to understand what it is he's saying. And so what I'm saying is that when you look at black authors, and you made a point I thought earlier was great. It's unfortunate that most black authors, or all of the ones I can think of, are here in the American West. But, what we're saying is that, God, is doing things today. You know what I'm saying? And there are people who have something to say about scripture. And through that, their cultural lens, they're able to illuminate certain things that people of other cultures and experiences may not. So when we talk about the ethics, piece, or when we're talking about, let me give a specific example. I'm kind of being vague here.
I got some when you're done, so don't feel pressure to do it all.
Okay, cool.
Go ahead though.
So when you think about the abolitionist movement and the civil rights movement, okay, it was a moral movement. It was in some ways a theological movement. Yep, You had this idea invading the church that black people, people of African descent and other colors as well, were literally less than human. Yep. I'm saying literally we're not of human stock, right? And so what you have is, these pastors going as far back as, however you want to go here in America. I'm saying we can talk about Absalom Jones. We can talk about, Richard Allen and a number of other folks, on up to, Dr. Martin Luther King. I know they're going to skewer me for using that name, but, just dealing with the theological content of what he put on the table, they were taking theology and saying, no, we are men. You know what I'm saying? And it had moral implications.
Yeah, they literally held signs that said, I am a man.
I am a man.
Imagine having to hold a sign that declares the fact you're a man.
Well, yeah, we're so tone deaf today because we think that racism has to do with just a sentiment, that somebody, of hatred or something like that. When as we go back in time, not all that far back, right? It's, this very real belief that black people were not men equally to white folks, so that's why they had to assert I am a man. But again, there's this very theological pillar undergirding much of that. And so for those who are writing on these things, they brought something to the church, maybe I will use the word infect. Much of the European church had been infected with this idea, right? And the antidote, to this idea that black people were less than human, by and large came through the theology, that was being brought forth by the black church.
Yeah, and let me
present in the civil rights movement.
Even now, so when I was in one of the Bible colleges, not Phoenix Seminary, this is a place I went before. It was a 2-year school, so it's where I got my associates, a pastoral ministry. Where I went, one of the things that we had to use was the Dake's Annotated Study Bible. Dake had in the notes stuff about Hamitic hypothesis and what the mark of Cain was, and straight up racist stuff in the study notes. And that was the book. And it was a multicultural school. That was the study Bible we were assigned. And I was like, what the what? You know what I'm saying? Look up everybody, to see what I'm saying. Look up Dake's Annotated Study, which used to be a major study Bible used by a lot of people for a while. Look up Dake's Annotated Study Bible on racism, right? Now, the other issue is, what we're saying is that Number one, certain issues need to be addressed that don't tend to be addressed by authors outside of the background of where the issues flourish, and they need to be addressed. And so if you're going to deal with those issues, which need to be dealt with because everything needs to have a gospel answer, doesn't it?
Sure.
You're going to end up recommending a lot of black or brown authors, generally speaking. But I can show you counterexamples. A lot of times when people in a modern era, this is the last year, if they say, here's a book on the Hebrew Israelites, generally speaking, they recommend my book. They're not racist against me. Well, he's, part Sicilian. He's not black, so I can't recommend his book. They recommend my book because they know it's a helpful book on the subject. So it's not just that, but let me show you some examples of what I mean. This book by Chris Brooks, who's a great, awesome guy and does stuff on Moody Radio. Mm-hmm. The apologetic issues that you contend with in an urban environment are not always identical 100% to the issues you face sort of in your average college campus. So a book like that needs to be wrote, and you have to have somebody who knows that. Same thing with this, an older book, Defending Black Faith. Issues about are all the ideas rip-offs of Egypt and things like that. They deal with stuff like that. Not only that, but the gospel itself, you guys, you got to understand, especially when the 60s and 70s were happening, people were like, hey, the gospel, this Christianity doesn't even offer a solution to the problems black folks are facing in America. Tom Skinner, who came out of gangs himself, said if Christ is the answer, so he's saying the gospel is the answer, what are the questions? He's saying there's certain questions we need to answer within our context, and because of that, he got into specific issues that a lot of people weren't dealing with at that time. He was way ahead of his time in the 70s. And not only that, but here's another example. Enduring Truth, this is a book about restoring sound theology and relevance to African American preaching, written from an empathetic perspective, saying, hey, within churches that are historically black, we need to restore a lot of the gospel that's kind of been seeped out by other things, and it's sort of within a specific black context. Very helpful thing, like that needs to be dealt with. Same thing with the racism that was in the Southern Baptist Convention. The reason why it became the Southern Baptist Convention is because they wanted to keep on holding on to their slaves, and this is a book that deals frankly with it. Brahman Holman, which is a Southern Baptist publisher. That needs to exist, and I'm glad it does. You're Grounded, this book I talked about earlier, talks about discipleship in an urban context. And the issues are not always the same, and so he deals with those. Some of the issues are the same, but those are helpful things. This book specifically says black writers. Why, though? Because it has slave narratives. If you want to understand slavery better and slave narratives, you're going to end up reading black authors. So, yeah, we're going to probably be recommending black authors. Where All the Brothers, specifically, what's the deal with black dudes not going to church? Redmond deals with that issue, an important issue that needs to be talked about. And last but not least, from an empathetic perspective, but yet viscerating, taking apart properly, Black Liberation Theology is Anthony Bradley's book. So, these aren't inferior books. We're not recommending this to up the ante on the status quo, or not status quo, but to change the status quo merely for the sake thereof, and to then have affirmative action and fulfill a quota is what I was trying to say. It's because it's good quality work on under subjects that are overlooked. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and see, I'm glad you said that, because so why are they overlooked, right? Because, I mean, obviously you use the word context several times. Like when you think about academia, right? Academia is largely interest driven, right? People don't write dissertations. They don't teach courses on things that they're not interested in. They don't write about things that they're not interested in. They don't research things they're not interested in, right? Now, so what are the kinds of things that individuals tend to be interested in? Usually they're going to have some sort of personal connection, right? Now, most white folks, you know what I'm saying, don't have a personal connection to what's going on with the Hebrew Israelites or something like that, or what's or any of the things that you would have mentioned. So we wouldn't expect them to write about those things. Now, is there something nefarious about that, or is there something evil about that? No, it's just a matter of interest, right? So what we're saying is, what we need to address the needs of the body of Christ as a whole, we need to expand, the kinds of information that we're making available to people. So it would behoove us to, put some more authors on the forefront who can tackle these different issues, you know what I'm saying, and really address what's going on. Because I'm trying to tell you right now, well, actually, that's going to get ahead, because now I think about it, but he's going to get to something in a minute I want to key in on.
All right, then let me flip to the next one. Good stuff so far. To the folks,
number 3.
I know everyone doesn't agree with everything we're saying even now, but let's just have an intellectual dialogue and discussion about this, guys. Let's just go along together and see if we can think about this. And I appreciate you guys' patience and understanding so far. Here's the next.
Here's my second reason why I mainly read white male theologians, or my problem with racialized theology. It's that
I got to stop there real quick. That was weird to me. And now this clip's 40 seconds, so I gotta. He said, why I mainly read white male theologians, or why I have a problem with racialized theology. Those two things are not the same. I actually a lot of us, this is just being frank, might end up mainly white male theologians because of sort of simply numbers. There's a numbers game aspect to it.
Right.
But saying that, touting that, is sort of odd in the first place. Second of all, that is not equivalent to what he just said, why I have a problem with racialized theology.
Right. He's making an assumption there. And so that's the thing. It's like, if his video could have been 30 seconds long. Why do I mainly read white theologians? Because that's most of the cats that's out here writing theology. Boom, end the story. He could have just left it at that. That's reasonable. You know what I'm saying? But I think he adds all these other extra layers because, as you alluded to earlier, maybe it's this organic piece. Like, he's responding to a real quadrant that's out there on the internet, and he wants to be the voice of that quadrant, and he feels like he's saying things that would resonate with them. So maybe that's why he feels like he needs to add all this other stuff. I don't know. But he could have made a 30-second video. Boom, in and out.
Yeah. I mean, I think what he thinks what he's doing is righteous and commonsensical. I do think that's what he's. But we're just trying to say maybe it's not as righteous and commonsensical as you suppose is what we're trying to do here. Here's the next clip.
Here's my second reason why I mainly read white male theologians, or my problem with racialized theology. It's that racialized theology is hypocritical. So I often hear people argue, sort of SJW leftist-oriented Christians, that Christianity...
There's other types of us who are interested in these issues, my man.
...isn't the white man's religion, so they're sort of trying to reclaim Christianity from whiteness, right? So let's just go with that for a second, right? So I often hear people argue that Christianity isn't the white man's religion because Jesus was actually Middle Eastern, and hey...
The argument is way deeper than that, but Adam, I'm going to let you get it. I still got 20 seconds left.
You know that Augustine is black and all that kind of stuff, right? So,
and all that kind of stuff. Like, yo, you're a doctor, bro. Just
talk about Jesus for a second, right? What if Jesus was white? Would that make Christianity the white man's religion? No, it wouldn't. Okay, one of the expressed purposes of Jesus' work was to relieve tension between ethnicities, Galatians 3:28.
Adam Coleman. That's one of my least favorite clips, to be honest with you.
Right.
I
mean, I'll be honest
right
with you.
there.
I think we're trying to be. Was that the end of the clip?
That's the end of that clip.
Okay, so here's my thing, man. So of the whole video, this part, I know we're trying to be cordial and everything. I frankly, I felt it was embarrassing. I think that there's no way. He should have just edited this whole point out. First of all, he refers to SJW leftist-leaning, Christians as being the ones making this argument, and I'm like, bro, this issue with Christianity being the white man's religion, that's not an argument coming from leftist-leaning SJW Christians. I mean, maybe there are some that are concerned about that, but I mean, the people making arguments about Jesus and Augustine wasn't white and therefore Christianity isn't the white man's religion. I mean, they're directing those arguments toward people who do believe that Christianity is the white man's religion, and they're trying to counteract those fallacious ideas. So with him doing, I'm gonna be honest with you, I was irritated because I mean, I'm not sure if they can see it or not. Well, I guess they can't see the video, but at this point, it's all this eye rolling on his part, and he's just treating it quite frankly, I felt like he was very condescending, and again, it just illustrates that he doesn't know what he's talking about. You know what I'm saying, he's way out of his lane right here. You know what I'm saying? So the thing of it is, unfortunately, there are people out here who believe that Christianity is the white man's religion, but the folks that he's taking aim at, it's like friendly fire. I felt. I mean, did you get that impression, or my way out of left field here?
No, I agree, and this was one of the most unfortunate sections, and
very much so.
So what happens is, because I don't think we understand, there has actually been theologians, we've talked about some of these defenders of slavery, for example, in the South, who basically made it like Christianity was a white man's religion, and the portrayals in Western media. Generally speaking, everybody looks like a bunch of Europeans running around, and and I'm not as much of a hater because I have a little bit of an understanding. Don't get me wrong, because I understand like people make things like the culture, and there's a dominant culture of Western, and it may not always be nefarious, but at the same time, what do you end up with? And then all the portrayals of like a clearly a Nordic, Northern European looking Jesus, and then people bringing out certain quotes, and people very recently, Bob Jones University, that had bans on interracial marriage and all this kinds of stuff. You couldn't even date somebody. The list goes on and on and on. And so people are like, yeah, this whole joint looks like this is the white man's religion. Like, and then there was an unfortunate strand of missionary activity, which praise God for the missionary movement. So this isn't no armchair criticism like that. But I think everyone can say, okay, there's a mistake there. That was like, become Christian, become European. Now I think a lot of that's been corrected. In seminary, all my training on missiology specifically attacked that had been done, but it had been done a lot, and it's not like it all went away. It's like, hey, you get your Christian name instead of whatever your African name was. That's not essential to conversion. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You got to wear this tie. I mean, this is real stuff, and so it goes deep. And to just dismiss it, there's people hurting, dealing with this stuff, seeing history, and we want to offer an apologetic, and videos like this just don't help.
Well, let me be more. I mean, it's he's in the way, bro. I'm just gotta put it that way. I mean, the thing of it is,
I don't want
let me just backtrack for a second.
I don't want Hebrews-lights to see this video. Now, of course, they will, but it's like
they're gonna use it, right? Well, no, I mean, let's talk about that though, right? Because when people like Hebrew Israelites or Competence or so forth see videos like Paul Maxwell's, what they'll do is they'll cite portions like the one you just played and be like, see, those white people don't care about y'all, and so on and so forth. And and they make a lot of it. But the fact of the matter is there's a real evangelism related issue here that he's just very condescending about and very dismissive of. So, so for example, let me backtrack for a second. Like when we think about worldviews, right? What are some ways that you can evaluate a worldview for its merits or lack thereof? You want to look at like internal consistency, how it's applied, how it aligns with reality, and so forth, right? So maybe our deepest intuitions, things of that nature. Now, if a worldview can't stand up to scrutiny when applied, or when confronted with like life's biggest questions, that's a red flag that there's something wrong with the worldview, right? So what people are saying that there's something wrong with the Christian worldview in that it's the handmaiden of white supremacy, and Europeanness and white culture and oppression and all these other kind of things. That's what people.
We're not saying that's accurate. We're saying that's not just out there. That's all over out there.
It's all over the place. It's all over the place. It's like,
and the thing is, from the street to memes to everywhere else. But then we've got to deal with it, and so. Okay.
And that's the thing. So now that's the thing. Now, if that was true, if Christianity really was this extension of white supremacy, then that would be an indictment against the biblical worldview. So we're arguing against that sort of a thing. So when he says things like, oh well, let's just go with that for a second, or he's kind of rolling his eyes and so on and so forth. Like, look, I'm dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, right, who are rejecting the gospel or leaving the church on this erroneous notion that Christianity is the white man's religion. It's not something that we ought to treat lightly. And I think it was actually, quite frankly, an embarrassment, that he did so at this point.
Agreed 100%. That's excellent, man. And that's why,
Here's my second reason.
I'm very glad to have you on today. Okay, here's the next clip. Number 8 by Paul Maxwell. Let's see.
Namely, that if Jesus were white, this would somehow corrode the credibility of his claims. This is false. Okay? Race should never be a premise in an argument for or against Christianity. And Christians should reject such premises. They should never share them with their racially motivated interlocutors. In other words, racialized theology is hypocritical because once you buy the premise that race plays a role in determining the legitimacy of certain ideas, this theory cuts both ways. So if you need Jesus to be white to be a Christian, then your faith is dependent on a certain historical contingency that's not taught in the Bible. So if one day we discover that Jesus was white, well, then your faith is toast. Or if one day we discover that Augustine wasn't actually black, but was actually, the space bug from Men in Black, well, then now you can't be an Augustinian anymore, right? And racialized theology makes theology about race as opposed to about ideas. And theology should be about ideas, not the race of a theologian.
It's true, but there's racist ideas. And nobody's saying if Jesus was white, his ideas are inferior. Part of what's being said is, hey, it's if you look what's going on and you study history and you see everything, it's impossible to think of Jesus as a Nordic-looking white guy if you understand the cultural context of the Bible. That's part of what's it's just saying, like, hey, let's try to be accurate. And I think what people were saying is what you were saying earlier, as far as the best argument against Christianity is like, hey, Christianity appears to be tailor-made to suit white supremacist ideas. That's part of what would make it false. That's what they're saying. They're not saying just because Jesus was white, and most of them don't grant Jesus was white. They're saying like the way he's portrayed or something like that. But it's just a mess, so it's hard to deal with. But yo, I'm gonna let you talk for a second. I gotta grab something. So the floor is yours for
man, I'm about to go in
for 2 minutes. All right, go ahead. It's all you, man. It's all you right now.
All right. Well, okay. So if y'all could just kind of indulge me for a second, I want to talk a little bit about philosophy, because he said something very interesting. He said that race should never be a premise in an argument for or against Christianity. Okay, it should never be a premise in an argument for or against Christianity. Now, what's interesting, I would refer people to Alvin Plantinga's work, right? I was reading his book, Warranted, Christian Belief, and he's kind of laying out his epistemological view called Reformed Epistemology. And he's talking about different kinds of arguments, right, against Christianity. And he breaks them down into two different categories. He breaks them down into a de facto argument against Christianity and what he calls a de jure argument against Christianity. And there's two different types. So a de facto argument against Christianity would be something like, if Jesus rose from the dead, then Christianity is true. Jesus, did not rise from the dead, therefore Christianity is not true. Like, if somebody were to make that argument, that would be an argument against the facts, that undergird Christianity. They're saying that something is factually incorrect about, Christian claims. That's what you call, that's a de facto argument, right? But, when you're talking about a de jure argument, then you're talking about an argument that's aimed at discrediting Christianity on other grounds, something that's other than factual. Now, in his book, he actually lists a number of different ones, but he talks about how folks discredit Christianity based upon the notion that it's supposedly irrational, or there's no, grounded reason as to why you can affirm that Christianity is true. So he's talking about the rationality piece of it, right? But he lists out again. So he talks about a number of different de jure reasons or arguments that people will make against Christianity. Well, one de jure reason, that one considers that it's that Christianity is allegedly culturally incompatible, with black folks. I'm saying, in the black community, they would argue that it's something. There's a Uncle Tomness to being black and being a Christian. This is what you call a de jure objection. It's not something about the facts of Christianity itself. It has to do with something other than what's factual that's meant to undermine Christianity. So the thing of it is, when you're dealing with de jure objections like that, Christianity is somehow incompatible culturally speaking, then race might actually play a valuable role in a premise, against in an argument against such notions. So, for example, you just indulge me for a second. I came up with a couple of different syllogisms. I'll just kind of throw one deductive one out real quick. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but just to kind of give an example. So, let's say if somebody says that Christianity is the white man's religion, and I want to make a counter argument. Let's just say I make this deductive counter argument. Step one: if Christianity is compatible with white identity and culture, and yet irreconcilably incompatible with non-white identities and cultures, then Christianity is the white man's religion. Step two: Christianity itself is not irreconcilably incompatible with black identity and culture. Therefore, step three: Christianity is not the white man's religion. Right? So that's a deductive argument, right? And I do have race, playing a part particularly in that, really in premise one and premise two. Now, when we're dealing for a de jure objection to Christianity, such as, Christianity is the white man's religion, this syllogism, including the racial component, would actually be appropriate, right? So that's an example that, when he says that, race should never be a premise in an argument for or against Christianity. Well, I would contend that when you're dealing with these kinds of de jure objections to Christianity, I think he's obviously wrong. Obviously, there are instances where it's appropriate to, for a premise in an argument for Christianity, to include, that racial component there.
No doubt. Good stuff. It looks like we might even have a kinist or some type of dude that's got some infection of the virus in the live chat. Hammer Abrams says, race mixing destroys racial identity.
Wow.
Yep. And he also says, Jesus died for all nations, But that doesn't mean they are all the same and should mix. That is United Nations, one world government of Satan described in the Bible, Revelation 17. This is what we're talking about.
This is what we're talking about. So can you describe a kinist? I'm familiar with it, but maybe everybody might not know.
Namely, that if Jesus.
Let me play this next clip, and we might do that later.
Okay, all right, cool. All right,
sorry.
Cool. Right.
Number 3. Most of the best theologians throughout history were white men, which is why I mainly.
I just want to rewind that real quick.
Number 3. Most of the best theologians throughout history were white men, which is why I mainly read white men as theologians. Thomas Aquinas, Peter Abelard, Bonaventure, Martin Luther, Melanchthon, John Calvin. If you neglect the writings of these men and you seek to understand the best ideas in theology, you are a fool. You're going to be bad at theology. You're not going to achieve your goal. And I will grant that there is such a thing as black theology insofar as it represents a political movement that utilizes theological ideas to advance a particular economic and social agenda. But this isn't a theology per se. You would probably better call it a theological appropriation or a political appropriation of theological ideas. The ideas themselves aren't black.
Adam Coleman, do you want to interact with that clip?
Yeah, I mean, again, the ideas themselves aren't black. I mean,
that's true enough. That's true enough.
Yeah, of course.
The idea is a conceptual entity. It doesn't have skin pigmentation. It
Right. Well, I mean, but again, I think we've kind of, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but of course ideas aren't black. But one thing that we can say is that based upon your cultural background and maybe some other factors, what you write about, is probably going to be a reflection of that. You know what I'm saying? Or what your intended audience is probably going to have some impact on what it is that you address in this or that book or dissertation or what have you, right? So, of course, ideas are not black or white, but, there are some topics that pertain more so to, one group or may have more of an impact in one group than they have in another. And I think I think what folks are trying to say is that, look, we don't want you to just abandon all white theology. You don't have to start reading Bonaventure and Martin Luther, all those guys. Read all you want. I'm saying, go for it. I think all people are trying to say is that, hey, you know what? Yeah, maybe some other folks have some things to say too. But again, like I said, I don't want to beat a dead horse on that.
I mean, it seems like a real missiological issue to me, for one. If you understand within the United States of America, not even going world yet, just the USA, there's different cultures and there's different kinds of people, and they, as a general rule, have different experiences. And for example, even he must understand that, because he says, I mainly read white theologians. He has some concept of what it means to be white then, if he's saying that. If he's saying that, that means he has some idea of what he thinks it means when he says a white theologian, right?
Interesting.
So there's a general understanding, and it seems obvious, isn't it, that it's helpful to know if you want to be a missionary, even just in the context in which you're planted, right? Which we are all supposed to do that as doing the good work of an evangelist, like Paul told Timothy, right? That you want to have some knowledge, some awareness. It doesn't mean you're an expert on all the issues. Nobody's saying that. But to discount it like it's irrelevant or it doesn't matter or it's not important within the history of America is problematic. And I think part of what we're saying is, some of the canon of seminaries could be altered in a helpful way. We're not talking about into SJW leftist nonsense. We're saying, why don't more of our theologians and students at the seminaries know who Absalom Jones is and Matthew Anderson? Why don't they know who Daniel Payne is? And why don't they know who Francis Grimke is? And shouldn't they care? Is it just that's the black church? But wait, I thought we were all God's people. I thought we were one unified church. It's like so that means that's my history too. If you're a white person, you're like, well, that's this other thing. Is it not? Those are your people, aren't they? But you haven't been exposed to it, almost certainly, because the way things are worked out and all that. And I'm glad you know who Charles Spurgeon is, but there's some other people to get to know as well. And so it's just like almost like, hey, get to know the family. There's an aspect of that because he switched the terms a lot between white theologians and white authors, and that's not identical, because some of what we're going to recommend is some history books, right? And some other types of things, some apologetic books. So white theologians, white authors, and black are not identical. But go ahead, my man. Go ahead.
No, I mean, that's dope. And I'm not going to spend too much. I know you want to get to the next clip, but I mean, I think too, just to kind of throw it in there, he talks about like these the black theology as being like an extension or maybe an appropriation of biblical concepts to advance a political or socioeconomic agenda, those kind of things. And what I think was interesting about that is, now true indeed, certainly, you do have like the James Coneses, for example, who, that shoe might fit there, right? That's fair enough, but when you think about if there are black authors, who are out here just writing crazy stuff, well, some of that has to do with the fact that, the more orthodox and conservative seminaries of yesteryear didn't allow African Americans in their ranks. So you do have this there may be this generation of individuals who are writing things that may not be on point, but why is that? It's because, going back to what we said before, unfortunately, the church was very much so infected by and taking its cues from the world regarding racial issues, right? So I think what we have to remember is, for those who have been holding it down, like the guys that you were talking about earlier, the Carl Ellis's and all those guys that you mentioned, for all those guys who've been holding it down, dude, let's not discount them. Let's highly esteem that. You know what I'm saying? Let's allow that to shine alongside everybody else.
Not because of theological affirmative action, but because these are needed things, additions
for the body.
The body of Christ may have not caught up on. I don't know. Should I let Hammer Abraham stick around? Here he is saying,
let him stick around.
Who ended the African slave trade? White theologians. Yeah, I guess Frederick.
Who ended the
African slave trade? White theologians. Yeah,
yes, that's such a
R.L. Dabney didn't help end the the slave trade. Frederick Douglass, Equiano. Did they have anything to do with it?
A lot of Equiano. Yeah, sure. Well, God ended the the transatlantic slave trade. Let's go with that. The God. So here's.
Hold on, I gotta play this clip.
Oh, come on. All right. No, that's cool. Yeah, no, go for it.
And the question is whether a writer is skilled in the methodology appropriate for providing an excellent answer, not what firsthand experience a writer has with the topic itself. So this is called competency confusion. Okay, your experience doesn't serve as a credential to speak authoritatively on a topic. Okay, you either know what you're talking about or you don't. Your genitals and your skin color have nothing to do with that competency.
All right, now, yeah.
It's just unnecessarily inflammatory. It's amazing to me because again, when he's talking about theology, I get this sense that it has a lean to it that mainly pertains to this orthodoxy side, the propositional knowledge aspect of theology, whereas orthopraxy and ethics, are a very. It's an essential part of theology,
it's
right?
It's almost like he's got it separated from the lived out human experience. But if you read Romans, the first half of Romans mainly deals with these deep truths of justification, and you could say it's sort of systematic theology in a way, ideas. Sure. And towards the latter half of Romans, it gets into applying it, and Paul starts to make these very practical applications to days, and celebrations, and all kinds of other things. It's done right there in the Bible, and most of the Bible, although we would never need to get, we have to have it, but most of the Bible actually, ironically enough, is not merely propositional statements. Like from Paul, he would be the master teacher in that area as far as the number of contributions, as far as propositional truths. It's theology grounded in narrative and story.
Thank you. That's beautifully put, and that's the thing. So for example, when we think about that verse when Jesus says that a woman travails, but then when the child is born, she has great joy. Like propositionally, I get it. You know what I'm saying, but my wife can understand that with much greater depth than I ever could. She's had 3 kids. You know what I'm saying, like she's actually experienced that kind of joy. You know what I'm saying, or being a father. Like I understand the love of a father to a child much more, having now been a father myself. There are dynamics to that element of God's love that are more apparent to me, right, than when I was, just a son. Now, it's not to say that, you have to occupy all these different categories to really understand God, but it is something to say that our experiences, right, do give us a lens through which we can articulate certain things about God, his nature, and so forth that are of value to the body of Christ. And we ought not deny that. So again, I keep going back to it, there's this intersection between, ethics and personal experience, so on and so forth. And if somebody is writing from that vantage point, certainly, they're writing, their experiences are intertwined with their theology and can be meaningful to the body of Christ. So again, I think, he's kind of, it sounds like he's talking about this more propositional side of that orthodoxy side, and that's all well and good, that's great, but to be honest with you, that's part of the reason why I think America ended up in the spot that it's been in, is that you have a number of folks who have separated the intellectual or propositional side of theology from the orthopraxy. Right?
Yeah,
they got the Trinity nailed down. Like,
as long as you believe in the Trinity, own as many slaves as you want.
Go for it.
I mean, obviously, I'm speaking tongue in cheek, but like this kind of went down. It was like, hey, that's the thing over there, and let's not. And I mean, so we're just bringing that out. And the other thing is, I do need to make the caveat that part of the video he was speaking about the female aspect, because remember the video side of white male theologians. We're not dealing so much today live stream with the female aspect, but those words still applied, I think, to the other aspect of it. So now I'm going on to the next clip. Good comment.
Well, can I just say?
Yeah, go ahead.
Say one thing. Like, I'm not just pulling this stuff out of thin air. Too. I mean, if you read like some of like Richard Landau's work or any philosophical work on ethics, I mean, you'll see that because he talks about competency confusion, right? Mm-hmm. And when it comes to like morality and making ethical decisions, there is what you call like this tacit or procedural knowledge aspect of it, to where you're putting moral principles in practice, and over time you become a more skilled person in terms of making ethical decisions, right? So it is the case that our experiences can live competency, particularly when you deal with moral issues, which again, moral issues can fall under, Christian ethics, which is a viable aspect of Christian theology. So it's simply not the case, that experience has nothing to do. You can't make a blanket statement that experience has nothing to do with the competency from a theological standpoint.
Now, we would never make the argument it makes you automatically right or wrong, but I mean, it's like it's funny because one of the people he mentions, I think his name is Jacko, something like that. He's a Navy SEAL, and he speaks on issues related to that. Paul Maxwell, would you check that dude out if he was speaking on all this Navy SEAL stuff at the same level if he was never a Navy SEAL himself? I don't think so. I'm just saying. It doesn't matter. We got someone in the super chat. Much love to you. Shreeded says, keep it up, guys. I'm African American, and a lot of my coworkers who are also the same keep reiterating that Christianity is false religion because it's not the first religion. I know they're wrong, though. Yeah, we'll get to that in another time. Here's a brief clip I just want to make a quick comment on.
Number 5. Tokenism produces incompetence, not competence.
The clip was number 5.
Number 5. Tokenism produces incompetence, not competent.
Why does he assume it's all about tokenism? Meaning, here's a black author for the sake of a black author. Here's a Hispanic for just for the sake of having a Hispanic author. Why is he assuming that? Don't assume that, please. That just seems.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. He's presupposing this tokenism. Now, if that was the case, if people were just putting these black authors on the table just for the sake of having black authors, then yeah, I'd agree with him 100%. But that's not what we're saying, bro. It's just that nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying is buy some black authors, put some money in these black people's pocket because they're needy and want to be heard. Just read their stuff. Nobody's saying that.
If you notice, guys, we've never once accused him of being a racist or a bigot, and you notice that? Not even one time. But let me just say this with that. It seems like a possible prejudicial blind spot or prejudicial statement for Dr. Maxwell to say in regards to recommending black authors. Well, tokenism produces incompetence. Why would you assume that the reason for recommending a book by Bruce Fields or Tom Skinner is about tokenism? And why not assume it's because they are competent?
Right.
So I hear you, Maxwell, but why the assumptions? They're nasty assumptions. And what I mean by nasty is like, I don't mean you're not, I mean like those are ugly assumptions to have. Next clip.
I don't care what color your skin is, what gender you are. I don't care. I do not give an F. I have no.
Why, bro? Why the extra hot sauce?
F's to give. And if you can talk the ideas well, then I want to talk. If you're going to push some equal outcome through tokenism for the sake of balanced representation of skin color and gender, I'm not interested in talking, because I'm not interested in having that conversation, and I'm not interested in having a fabricated accusation thrown at me of racism and sexism, which has become such commonplace, such stock and trade among leftist, intersectional leaning evangelicals. Okay, I just don't care, not even a little bit, not even a little bit. And a good theologian shouldn't care about these issues. Okay, a good human being shouldn't care.
I'm going to give it to you, but he's saying that, and there's some truth to some of that. But notice, he is accusing the people he's disagreeing with of racist and racism and bigotry. We haven't done that. The show, the last comment I made was the closest we got in regards to why I assume there's incompetency here, and it's about tokenism, whatever. But the accusation being thrown about, it's true that people do that too much and too often instead of discussing ideas. But here we are playing clips, dealing directly with it. And I messaged him. I don't have a personal relationship with him, but I messaged him and said, hey, we're going to be critiquing your video tonight. I'm just sending you this message out of a sign of respect. So I think he can handle all that. And I think you can see there's legitimate disagreements there. Adam.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that last clip is kind of the heart of the video. I think it's the heart and soul of the whole video. He seems pretty salty. And I'll just say this. I mean, I think just by and large in society, I think there's this angst among, some white males of being projected as the bad guy. We're always the bad guy, so we're going to kind of lash out against that. I get it. I mean, nobody wants to be the bad guy all the time. I mean, I get tired of it. Every time I turn on TV, you got black people, and this or that show is like the thug or something like that. So I get that, right?
Especially the guy with dreads.
Yeah, exactly. He's a weed smoking, the pothead thug or whatever. Like I understand that, right? And so I think that he's kind of this video is like a counter to that, like a backlash to that. And so again, I think this last piece is just like the heart and soul of what he really wants to say. Now, with that being said, again, we haven't called the guy racist, and certainly merely recommending, black authors is not an accusation of racism. If somebody writes a blog about black authors you should read, I don't know why anybody would interpret that as being some sort of, even an implicit, accusation of racism to anybody. It's just, read some black authors, bro. It doesn't have to be that deep. But I think you hit the nail on the head earlier that he's conflating different cultural trends or different cultural, phenomena all into one pot. Right. You know what I'm saying? So the cultural phenomena of, let's just call it anti-white, tension. Let's just call it that. That cultural phenomena is independent from the cultural phenomena of individuals within the body of Christ.
Speak it, Doc.
Recommending, African American authors.
That's right,
Two
Doc.
different things. You hit me with the Hebrew Israelite joint.
No, I said Doc.
Oh, Doc. Okay,
yeah. That's right, Doc. Right. Tell him, Doc.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So he's conflating and he's just confused. So what I'm saying is, what I would recommend, I hope he responds to you, in terms of your message, by the way, have some dialogue with individuals, get in proximity with individuals you disagree with and talk about this further, because I think he'll then, if he's a reasonable person, and I have no reason to think that he isn't, I don't know him, then I think maybe he could be more well acquainted with some of the nuances of this discussion and not, make a fool of himself by saying things that some of the things that he said.
And we say that with all due respect and with love, but yes.
Sorry, yeah.
Nah, you're right though.
I'm just saying, put his foot in his mouth. Maybe
don't care what color you're saying.
But for real, he should be able to handle it. He's a big boy. He's going at it like a big boy, and we're being big boys.
Affirmative action is.
Notice this whole video, we're not sitting here talking about our feelings and nothing like that. You know what I'm saying? All right, next part.
Just clarify. I have no doubt in my mind. This guy, he's not a racist. I didn't get any indication. I mean, he clearly denounced racism early in the video. He was very adamant about that. So I don't want any Hebrew Israelites or anybody, taking a disagreement, disagreements that we may have and making it more than what it is. It's just simply a disagreement. It's not about emotion. It's not about, accusations. It's about just, engaging his ideas. He's an ideas man, right? Right. So we're engaging his ideas. There you go.
Here we go.
Affirmative action is willing to trade the slowly acquired bona fide respect based on competence for the quickly gained status that competency yields. Now, the best means of achieving equality of opportunity for all races and genders, which is the best way of achieving equality for all races and genders, is to hold the same standard of competence for everyone.
true enough, but why does he assume when we talk about this stuff that that's not what we're doing? I just don't know why.
I don't know. Well, well, let me put it this way. I'm not a advocate of affirmative action, as such, but I know. I'll just take my dad for example. My dad was working for the federal government back in like 1976, 78. He started with the government, right? And his first day of work, I'll just make this quick. He hit the elevator floor, and a janitor walks up to him and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to my office." And the janitor stopped him and said, "We've never seen one of us work above the first floor."
Oh, so it was a black janitor, and he said
it was a black janitor.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So the janitor's office, janitor's room, I guess, was on the first floor. He said, "We've never seen one of us with an office, work above, the first floor." So now I'm not saying that my dad got in necessarily because of affirmative action. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. You know what I'm saying? But the point is sometimes, as a result of him having the opportunity, which it was pretty slim at that time, me, I've got 2 degrees. My mom, she's pursuing her doctorate. My sister has a degree. You have to have a starting point. And sometimes a starting point can open up things for people down the line. Now, I told that story to say that, we're not expecting people to just go buy a whole library of black authors. We're just saying, consider some folks.
And then consequently, because he makes a chart later, throw away all your John Piper and John Calvin and your D.A. Carson, John McCarthy. You gotta burn that. I mean, he almost makes it seem like it's like a zero-sum game.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my point. It's nobody's saying, and it's funny he quoted Thomas Sowell, because apparently Thomas Sowell, individuals like Paul Maxwell seem to think that Thomas Sowell is like the nuclear bomb to use in one of these kinds of discussions. You got to quote Thomas Sowell, when you're talking about, against black folks in the SJW.
Number 1, Thomas Sowell. Number 2, Vodi Bakum. And I like both of those guys, actually, to an extent, meaning I appreciate the ideas they talk about, but that's kind of how a lot of these dudes operate.
That's how they treat it. Right. So my whole point is, opportunities, there's a difference between, it's not about opportunities. I think it's just about exposure.
Affirmative action.
We would like to see folks expose themselves to, an array
these
of God
has. What'd you just say, bro? We'd like to see folks expose themselves. I'm sorry, man. Let me play this clip. I know what you're saying. You're saying to a broader base of reading outside of their tribe. That's all you're saying. Here's the next clip.
Outside the tribe.
These blogs are intended to say the opposite of this, but actually make this racist assumption, which is actually sort of a white supremacist assumption, which we should all reject, which is the assumption of these blogs is to say, well, we all know that white men produce the best theology, but if you take them out of the equation, which we need to do, here are the best 5 books, here are the best 10 books, right? It's ridiculous. Don't fabricate an equality of outcome. Don't make your standard a balanced representation of ethnicities and genders in your top 5 or must-reads, top 5 black authors. What? Read the best thing, okay? Read the best stuff on the stuff that you're talking about, okay?
We all know that white people make the best theology, but if you want second best, come over here to the ghetto of literature. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't know.
I mean, who's saying this stuff? Like, I mean, the thing of it, first of all, I don't think these blog writers are making the assumption that they need to take white folks out of the equation in order for these other works to be valuable. I don't think anybody is making that assumption. Anybody. I would love for him to give us an example. I would love to see an example of who he read. What blog did he come across where he got the impression that we need to have? Because as a matter of fact, I don't know if it comes in a minute, but he refers to it as like the Special Olympics for for black authors. No. It's like, come on, like saying this stuff, bro. It's like, it's just embarrassing. I mean, and I get it. It's like you said, it's that extra hot sauce, man. Just I
got that from you. I got just so everyone knows. Yeah, we were talking about this beforehand, and Adam Coleman was like, "Why all the extra hot sauce?"
Extra hot sauce, man. It's just maybe it's showmanship. He's got a platform. He's got he has a crowd. Maybe that's what it is. But, bruh, I mean, nobody is saying let's create a Special Olympics for.
Oh man,
again, we're just saying that, let your interests, let your exposure be as broad as the body of Christ is. You know what I'm saying? Like, God has done a salvific work among different people. I'm gonna be honest with you, like, from my vantage point, I spent a lot of time, like you talk about reading some of these slave narratives and digging into, Carl Ellis and all these different guys. But you know what? I'm aware that there are other. I'm sure there are Hispanic authors, that may have a perspective, or maybe Native Americans, and
it's less so within the evangelical spectrum, but it's coming along. I try to keep tabs on it every now and then. Yeah, it's happening slowly but surely.
Or what about in China right now?
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Think about right now with the the oppression that's going on, the persecution. I want to make it strong. The persecution that's going on in China right now. If you have an author coming out of this very communist, atheistic, background, they've experienced persecution, surely they would have something to say that, may not be as apparent to myself living over here in America, with the freedoms and whatnot that we have. I would love to hear, a Chinese author talk about applying the scriptures to their current predicament and the kinds of just insight that they were able to gain from that. I would love to see something like that, and those are my brothers and sisters in Christ over there. Of course, I'd be interested in what they have to say,
Oh, it doesn't have nothing to do with you like an affirmative action?
Right.
I'm sorry, man. Nah, but it's there's something else I was gonna say about that, but well, okay, yeah. Let me go ahead and say this. Yeah.
Go for it.
White people produce the best theology, he says. First of all, we don't know the skin tone of hardly anybody prior to, it's like, when do we start getting colorized portraits of people? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know what Ignatius looked like. I don't know what Irenaeus looked like. I know Origen and Tertullian from Africa, but I don't actually know what they look like. I know Justin Martyr was from the Samaritan area of Israel. I don't know really what he looked like. I don't know for sure what Augustine looked like. I don't know what Alexander of Alexandria looked like. I don't know what Arius looked like. I don't really know what Athanasius looked like for sure. I don't. You see what I'm saying? Like, we go like.
Yeah, we don't have photos, right?
So we start knowing. When is it that we start seeing a lot of portraits? Like maybe it is sort of around the medieval era. Maybe it is around the Reformation where we start seeing what these guys. Maybe that's when, perhaps. But skipping all that, white theologians produce the best theology. I read the 66 books of the Bible.
Thank you.
And I don't think any of those guys, if you saw them walking down the street, would say, "Hey, there's a white guy." I don't think you would say that.
Right.
You would, if someone said, let's say, this is gonna be so stupid. Let's say, why am I even saying this? Because I'm dumb. Let's say Peter committed a crime, right? Okay. No, that's a good one. Let's say Peter cut off the Roman soldier's ear, which he did, Malchus. Okay. And let's say you were there in the garden and you were watching it. And afterwards, Jesus, this is a counterfactual. Jesus didn't heal him, and then it was the end of the scene, and they were trying to figure out who did it because Peter scattered. He ran afterward. And they're like, "Hey, there's a witness right there." And they came up to you. You're hiding behind a tree, right? And they're like, "Excuse me, sir, could you just please describe the ethnicity of that individual who wielded the knife and chopped off Malchus's ear?" I don't think you're going to be like, "Well, he was like white and 5'11" with blonde hair." I don't think that's how you would end up describing him. You know what I'm saying? Right. I'm just...
I seriously doubt it.
Anyways.
But the thing of it is, though, to your point, the 66 books, obviously, being the primary sources of theology, I don't think that you could produce theology better than those. So, if obviously people of some melanation, I don't even think that's a word.
Yeah. But I got you.
Some sort, produce those. You can't do any better than that. But let's just, for the sake of maybe trying to key in on what he was saying, like, if he's talking about people reflecting on the scriptures, that white people have produced the best theology. Well, I guess, how do you define best? What's your metric there? What are you aiming at? Like, are you assuming that maybe Thomas Skinner, is why is he not somebody who's reflecting on scripture in an excellent way? Or why not Carl Ellis or any of these other folks? Why not? I love, some of the writers that he's talking about, but it seems very subjective to me. Like, what does he really mean by that?
Not only that, but aren't a lot of the worst heretics in history, as far as we know of in the modern era, white guys?
That's where I was going next. I wasn't sure if we wanted to go there.
No, you know what? Let me pause it, and we'll go there again. Let's play this next clip. We're going to get back to that, because I think that's a funny point. But here's the next clip.
I think it's a great point.
Number 6. The neglect of white theologians will produce bad theology. Okay. So I only have so much time to read, and so do you. And so when you require yourself to read more books from other genders and other races, I
gotta stop there. Hold on. I hope everyone caught that. I'm gonna play it again. It doesn't mean, again, nobody is saying that this means, I'm not saying, because I'm the one making this point, Paul Maxwell, you're a racist, or that's we won the argument because we said that. However, right. I am going to say, Dr. Paul Maxwell, you got some blind spots, and why have you limited your audience the way you've limited it? It's like you know who you're talking to, and that's it. Because what he says is, when people encourage you to read authors of other races, now the other gender thing, okay, you know, we're not really dealing with that issue here. It's a different type of thing in my view. Other races, so he's white guy talking to white guys, you know, read these other people. I just feel like that's like, okay, I see where you're coming from. Let me play this clip, though.
Number 6, the neglect of white male theologians will produce bad theology.
Nobody said you had to neglect them.
The neglect of white theologians. Very interesting.
Right.
So I only have so much time to read, and so do you. And so when you require yourself to read more books from other genders and other races just for the sake of reading other books by other genders and other races, you by necessity read less of other books. Now, you either see that as a reduction of intake from the white perspective, or you see it as reading foundational, primary, indispensable ideas less. Okay, I've seen people blog about how necessary it is that to read certain books by ethnic and gender minorities published by Moody Press or Crossway, you know, and these authors who are making these suggestions, I know for a fact, haven't read Herman Bavinck's Reformed Dogmatics or Turretin's Institutes or Van Til's Defense of the Faith or Muller's Post-Reformation Reformed Dogmatics or Thomas's Summa Contra Gentiles or August.
Now he's just flossing. All right, so Adam Coleman, back to you.
Well, no, I mean, so what he's talking about is like this sort of kind of opportunity cost type of thing. Like, okay, well, if you're reading more of these guys just for the sake of, you know, reading people of other races and other genders, then blah, blah, blah. But I mean, well, but again, nobody's saying that you should read these other individuals just for the sake of, you know, balancing out, you know, representation and opportunity and so on and so forth. Nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying that, right? What we're suggesting is that you know, read the best theology. It just so happens that, you know what, the best theology includes some authors who are non-white and non-male. That's really all we're trying to say, you know. But it seems to me that again, I mean, to your previous point, that he's made these assumptions about, you know, who's putting out good theology. It's like, bro, I mean, you know. I don't know if you want to go back to what you were saying before, but like when he talks about other races, when you're reading other races, well, sounds to me like he assumes he's talking about all white people. You know, I mean, is that the assumption that he's making? And if so, that's kind of odd. I would think, you know. But I mean, I don't know. You want to chime in on that or?
Nah, I mean that's part of the problem with some of modern evangelicalism is it kind of assumes, hey, that's all we deal with. But I thought, you know, evangelical is supposed to be defined historically according to belief. Not some other category. Only a few more clips, and these last two I think are very important.
Number 6.
So don't go anywhere, everybody. There's only 2 more clips actually, 3, but you need to hear these, everybody. So please don't go anywhere. Here's the next one.
7. Most white male theologians don't perpetuate racism or sexism. So, come to think of it, I don't think any widely accepted evangelical theologians propose a theological distinction between ethnicities or sexes.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It depends if you can include, like, for example, Rushdoony. I don't know if you guys know who that is. I mean, he's not... you know, he's important. He's extremely important in some circles. I'll put it that way. But you want to comment on that? Or you want to go to the next one, my man?
I think the next clip is okay. I'll save my comment for that. Yeah,
I got you. And also, if you find anything
7
specific you want to talk about in the live chat, once we play this live clip, let me know, brother Adam. All right, here we go. Here's the next clip, which is the second to last.
In conclusion, if you want to become very good at theology, you should be reading mostly white male theologians.
Now, I played that this time, and it was on my face. I'll play that one more time again, and now it's on your face. All right, let's just do that again. There we go.
In conclusion, if you want to become very good at theology, you should be reading mostly white male theologians.
Thanks for the new bibliography, Paul Maxwell.
This dude, man. This dude. I mean, it's so funny. Like, what do you mean by should? Like, if he meant should as in just by sheer numbers and ratio, most theologians are white, then okay, that just is what it is. But it sounds like this should has more force to it than that, which I think is problematic. I mean, just just a second. He said, read the best theology. I'm with you, bro. Read the best theology. And you don't have to compromise reading good theology just because you crack open a book that's written by somebody who's non-white. And again, it just goes back to, well, let me just give an example. I think about Paul in Athens, right? Acts chapter 17, okay? He's talking to the philosophers, and he's talking about their poets and so on and so forth. Like, he knew something about their culture and, the unknown God and so on and so forth. And he was able to take from that, right? And then point them to a gospel truth, right? So he engaged their culture and pointed them to Christ. So what we're saying is, it actually, if you want to engage, certain individuals, for evangelistic purpose, you talked about missiology, right? Well, it helps to know a little bit about their culture sometimes. And you can take from that cultural capital and point people towards Christ. And in the vein of doing that, one thing that might be helpful to you as a minister of the gospel, one thing that might be helpful to you is somebody who's situated within that culture, who's reflected on these things and written about it. And they can give you some of that cultural capital by which you can draw from it. And as you encounter individuals you're ministering to, you'll be able to do like Paul, draw from the culture and point people to Christ. You know what I'm saying? This is why authors from different cultural vantage points are very important, because we have a gospel to preach. We have a gospel to preach. And why deprive ourselves of certain resources that'll help us to do that more effectively, just because, we want to be like, what's our guy here, Paul Maxwell? I mean, why? Why, bro? But anyway, that's all I want to say on that.
All right, last clip, ladies and gentlemen. Last clip.
I hope this is the one I'm thinking of.
If it's not, if I didn't, we can still comment on that one after that. All right, but I'm gonna okay. This last one right here. And it's clip 18. This is
in conclusion, if you want to
end here, and let me drop this in. All right, is everybody ready for the last clip? Here we go.
Think about the ideas. That's all I'm saying. And when you think about the ideas, you end up reading a corpus that is written or composed in majority by white males. Is that a problem? No, it's not a problem. Why would that be a problem? Okay? When you're talking about theology, you're talking about ideas. You're not talking about the skin color of the theologian, unless you're a racist. Read the best theology. The authors of that corpus happen primarily to be white men. Deal with it.
Deal with it. Oh, man. I thought it was a different clip, but okay, that's cool though, But again, there's that extra hot sauce, man. Deal with it. There you go, bro. There you go. Again, man. I guess maybe he views himself in some sense as being a spokesperson for, or maybe appealing to that base of individuals that he believes himself to be talking to, kind of just lashing back at this, racist, white author, white people sentiment that's out there on the internet and in the 5 blogs that he read. But, I mean, the fact of the matter is, bro, let's be real. Like, most theologians out there that are accessible to us today are probably white folks. I think that's gradually changing. I think that we're diversifying in our ranks. I think that's a beautiful thing. So if you're reading mostly white theologians based on numbers alone, I ain't mad at that. But again, if you want to be equipped, to serve in a diversity of contexts and to serve people that you're likely to encounter out here in the world, then it would behoove you, again, to maybe reach outside of your tribe and, like Paul, be acclimated to some of the, the cultures and stuff that you're going to run into. And somebody that can help you do that is somebody who's a fellow believer, grounded in sound theology and situated within those cultural contexts that can give you a little bit inside track. So that when you're out here on the street, or wherever you may be, trying to, be a light for the gospel, preach the gospel, so on and so forth, you have some means to communicate with other folks. You can get outside of your tribe and outside of your bubble. That's why these different individuals are important. So yes, if you're reading mostly, like, as he said, mainly white theologians, I think that you have good reason, and hopefully we've articulated that you've got good reasons to maybe reach outside a little bit, because you may not be, you might be reading good theology, but why don't you broaden it some?
Yeah. Now I don't think he intends this, and I don't think he thinks this, but just sort of after watching the video again for a number of times, as well as on his website Selfwire, the blog's there too, so it's written out as well. It seems as if Dr. Maxwell almost thinks as if black Christians ain't got nothing good to say. Like it's not they ain't really got nothing important to say. And that's not going to change, so don't let people fool you into thinking that they do. Now, I don't think he intends that, but man, it's easy to get that impression. I'm just saying, for me.
Yeah, I really wondered how familiar he is with black. I mean, I wondered how many black authors he's engaged. The reason why I say that is right before this clip, he said something interesting. He said that Frederick Douglass had a particular theologian who was of a liberal stock. I
caught that. I almost played that, and I was like, that's too much. But yeah.
No, I mean, but see, it was very telling, though. You know what I'm saying? Because he says, Frederick Douglass has such and such theologian on his wall, and that person has this liberal theology. Do you like this? Do you like that liberal theology that this theologian had, that Frederick Douglass? And he starts going on about it, and I'm like, bruh, Frederick Douglass was not a theologian. You see, like nobody is presenting Frederick Douglass as being a theologian,
black
right?
writer,
now,
black author, black speaker.
Black author, absolutely. Black speaker, very influential, very important in terms of from a historical standpoint. And actually, he did draw from some biblical resources to make.
Yes, he did.
He did. In terms of abolitionism and so forth. So valuable. In that sense. But I just thought it was hilarious that he cited him. I guess he cited him as a theologian or something like that. That's kind of strange.
It's also weird, like
it was an empty. They had like a veneer of historical merit.
The one dude he mentions, he basically is like throws shade on him. You know what I'm saying? Like
right.
But Frederick Douglass did a lot of dope stuff in regards to people's thinking. And it did have to do. He did express ideas. He did express ideas and expressed them very well. And he did so. He didn't do it without the Bible. The Bible was part of his argumentation.
Very much so.
I just read my kids, it's last year now, like a children's level biography of Frederick Douglass. It was pretty dope. It was good to hear about and learn about. And I mean, he was more biblical centered than actually at least some of the other abolitionists he worked with, because not everybody involved with the abolitionist movement was all evangelical Christians or anything like that. Certainly, that's an important part. We're never going to downplay Wilberforce and all that. I'm not even going there, or John Newton. But there's other strands within the movement as well, and so Douglass was sometimes more biblical, with my understanding, than some of his contemporaries in that area. Anyway, but that was a bit odd. I mean.
Well, I mean, and just as an important point, again, this gets at what we were talking about before. So people get it confused. The abolitionist movement was not an equality movement. So we had to be very clear about that. You know what I'm saying? The abolitionists, even, the white abolitionists who were adamantly against, slavery, they weren't all, it wasn't, they weren't by necessity also equalists, I guess you could say. They didn't believe that black people were necessarily equal. Some did, some didn't. It was so I've said that to say that where you have this degree of black abolitionists and white abolitionists within the body of Christ running together in terms of the issue of slavery, they did in some regards depart from one another in terms of whether black people were equal or not. And in those instances, you see theology in the black church being a buttress to say, no, these, in addition to slavery being wrong, right, black folks are just as equal to everybody else. You know what I'm saying? It just by virtue of the fact of the Imago Dei, that we were made in the image of God, So again, those are valuable things to read. Read, David Walker's Appeal. You know what I'm saying? Read a lot of Equiano's autobiography. He was actually reformed, by the way. You know what I'm saying? Read his
A
autobiography.
lot of the people I mentioned
You know,
earlier were when I rattled off Grimke and Payne and Anderson. I went out of my way to actually try to mention a lot of specific Calvinist folks, and
Gotcha.
I could do that more. John Morant, for example, saved at a George Whitefield revival meeting. You know, one of the first missionaries to Native Americans in America. You know, it's like this is stuff that's important in there, needs to be brought out and understood, and yeah, I mean,
and this history belongs to all of us.
yes,
This isn't Black history, okay? This is the history of the church, okay? So it's not something that should only be of concern to Black people. I'm saying this is something that God has done in the earth. So if you're a Christian, I'm saying if you have no barriers in terms of race and so on and so forth, then these things ought to resonate with you. I'm saying it's pretty awesome to see God doing a work in those dark times amongst His people. I'm saying, like, why wouldn't you be interested in reading about that? Why wouldn't that be of some importance to you? And if it isn't, I think that you maybe need to look in the mirror a little bit and kind of answer that question. What's going on there?
Yep, good stuff, man. I think we should end right here. I said it was probably going to take. Remember before I was like it's probably going to take
you said about 2 hours, yeah.
And it's almost
Yeah,
there. Guys, we didn't quite hit any goals for a freestyle, so some of you will be happy about that. It takes 50 in the super chat, which I didn't even mention till now. Sorry, I just got so carried away with the topic I didn't mention, and also or 100 people viewing, and we got right under there, but we never did. And so we no freestyle today, which will be good. Some of the people are getting quite mad, apparently, with my perspective, saying, "Oh, look, you're just a shill for Roman Catholic liberation theology. In fact, you freestyle. That's an example." It was somebody came in here saying, which I think is funny.
What?
Yeah. I saw. There's some interesting comments, man, in here.
Yeah, why don't we engage some of these comments, man? I'd love to do it, man. If you get take 5 minutes and just kind of touch on.
Well,
That's up to you. It's up to you.
I don't know. It's I don't know.
Because I'm really interested in at what point in this conversation he felt like we were embracing liberation theology. I don't know where he got that from.
Someone you may know. Oh, here you go. Oh yeah, Hammer Abram. You say the same guy. He said this.
Oh, okay.
Malone, aren't you an apologist? Why don't you apologize what the Bible teaches about race? You have become a shiller of Roman Catholic liberation theology.
What? That's the Kenneth guy that was.
Yeah. This is a funny comment, but the person's serious. That's what's funny about it. But nonetheless, shill apparently is the word of the day. Michael A says, anyone with a Grateful Dead shirt, I suspect to be a CIA shill from experience. But the thing is, I looked at his other comments, and I thought it was joking, which I thought was a funny joke, but I think he was serious.
Oh, wow, okay.
Hammer Abrams says, Malone, which people created religious freedom? The Baptists from Rhode Island.
They created religious freedom?
Yeah, they created it, man. They just...
For who? Okay, all right. That's very interesting. I want to...
that's not a people, by the way. That's a denomination. That's not a people. Anyways, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I just can't stop sharing these guys' comments. People who race mix are the minority. The vast majority will not. Do you think China is going to integrate blacks?
Yeah, what's his point there? So let's follow the lead of other races. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, people with what a weird statement to say. Like, it's people with a non-biblical worldview that. Hebrews in the Hood came on. And it says, I don't care about the racial aspect, but I know there's no human being in your circle that can debate me. Vocab.
Oh, yeah.
That's Mikhail Van Israel.
There we go. Oh, is that him? Oh, okay. Yeah. I haven't heard from him in a while, man. That's hilarious, yo.
And then Hammer Abram also said, Malone, you were Hollywood. You were trying to guard to be black. I think we went too hard. You rap and condemn whites for preserving their nation. You are pushing the devil's lies.
Their nation, right? Well, it just sounds like this Kenneth is it's Kennism. Well, just be honest, like Kennism is just biblically sophisticated racism. That's really what it is. It's racism shrouded in just biblical associations. That's pretty interesting.
Voice of Reason said that Pine Creek is here just for the rap. When Pine Creek, he's an atheist, by the way. I got respect for you, though. You know we got love for you, bro. He said, did I miss the freestyle? Sorry, today you probably did miss freestyle because we haven't made enough in viewers super chat to do the freestyle, so yeah. And then Hebrews in the Hood, why are you even talking about? This is funny. Hammer Abrams said, Malone, you're showing your own lack of Bible knowledge. You sound like James White condemning Islamicizing.
What?
Oh, man, what's happening?
Man, that's wild, man. That's wild.
So, I don't know. Those are kind of the main ones I kind of saw. I hope people learn something from this discussion.
Yeah, I hope so. Hope so.
I hope that they feeling it. And I hope that they learn something about it.
Yeah, the main thing I hope people learn is that, when you're talking about engaging, non-white authors, nobody's asking anybody to, sacrifice their time engaging solid theology for the sake of some kind of tokenist, affirmative action initiative amongst, as he says, biblical or theological inquiry. Nobody's saying that. I mean, I think that what we're saying is that in engaging sound theology, there are people who are non-white who have written some very important works that can be a blessing to the body of Christ, and you should step outside of your tribe, in order to engage those things. Number one, and you can engage the same level of theology that you would anywhere else. I'm saying this is not a special Olympics of authors, as the gentleman joked earlier. But in addition to that, I mean, the fact of the matter that when you're talking about I was talking about, we've been talking about black authors. The fact of the matter is, again, not to be a broken record, but sometimes having access to certain cultural insights can, be beneficial in terms of engaging individuals with the gospel. And there's nobody that I think can help you do that better than somebody who's a Bible-believing Orthodox Christian who's situated within those contexts and can give you the inside track in that regard, so that you'll be better equipped to preach the gospel to whomever it is that you may come across.
No. I'd much rather read a white author on the black experience than a black author. Thank you very much.
There you go.
Someone's going to take that clip and be like, Vocab admits it.
There you go.
Michael A. says, I was serious. Grateful Dead was part of a CIA mind control operation.
All right. I've got a tinfoil hat here.
What is that?
That's terrible. I'm sorry.
Scotty Amber Beats says, from freestyle for this, these are all my savings.
What?
Oh, no. Hammer Abrams deciding to get worse. Right, we're about to sign off. Whites don't owe any other tribe anything. We gave you the gospel, the Bible, literacy, and much wealth.
And on that note, I just want to cite Hammer Abraham as being exactly why it's important that folks get out there and engage other authors. This dude is hilarious.
Oh,
man.
my
We gave you the
goodness.
gospel. Interested. Wow.
Oh, no.
Well, here's my question is, who gave Europe the gospel? Because if you would talk about, Augustine, come on, man, let's talk about Tertullian. Let's talk about, but anyway.
It was about Jesus and Paul, and
Jesus and Paul. How far back we want to go? How far back we want to go?
Well, Peter was European, right? Okay. Oh no, he wasn't. Oh my
right.
goodness, bro.
We gave you the gospel. Very interesting.
We don't owe any other tribe anything. What a weird thing. What is the white tribe?
Crazy.
When we said tribe earlier, we meant like socio-political circles.
You know what's funny about that though? Because the thing of it is very this idea that he seems to be pushing forward is a very new idea. When we talk about whiteness, right? Mm-hmm. That idea is maybe about 400 or 500 years old in terms of the way that it's expressed today.
Yeah, basically.
Because even going back to like the 1940s and to the 1800s, for example, Irishmen weren't considered to be quote white, right?
My people weren't considered
Eastern
to be
Europeans,
white.
Eastern Europeans weren't considered to be white, but now they are.
Yeah.
Now they are. So what white nation is he talking about? I just find that to be it's a very modern notion that he's got there. It's certainly not a biblical one. I don't see the term white nation in the Bible. I certainly don't see that anywhere.
We gave you
the table of nations in Genesis. You see the white in there somewhere.
We gave you the gospel, the Bible, literacy, much. So, do you think all the authors of the Bible were straight up white? Is that what you think, Hammer Abram? You think that like people who were non white didn't know how to read? I mean, do you think that the cradle of civilization, as it's called, was filled with a bunch of white folks? It's super weird. It's funny he says, and gave you much wealth. I mean,
much wealth. That's interesting.
I think Egyptian had some wealth before the Europeans came in there. In fact, I think the Europeans took a bunch of their old wealth and put it in their museums.
Well, wait a minute. And actually, let's flip it a little bit, because when you think about cotton, so back in the 1850s, going into the 60s, cotton occupied the same space in the world market that oil does today. Just kind of put it in perspective, right? So obviously, that cotton was brought about by slave labor. So we can say that we gave you a lot of wealth. As a matter of fact, actually, it's the other way around. Whatever wealth you gave us, you wouldn't have got it without us in the first place. So what are we even talking about?
So...
Even as a matter of fact, even the in the North. I mean, we talk about the Industrial Revolution. I'm saying a lot of that was grounded in the textile industry. Which got us materials from down south and cotton and so forth. So what are we even talking about?
Yeah. All right, man. We got to call it a night before he says something else crazy.
Oh man, that's fun, man. That's hilarious, man.
Now, just again, we are not saying the views of the guy in the live chat have anything to do with the views of Paul Maxwell. This guy just saw this as an opportunity, the Hammer Abram guy, to come out the woodwork and do his thing, right? We're not we get all that. We're not about that. But while we're at it, it's like, here's this guy with these ideas running around like this is the real deal, and it's like, well, you may be like, why are you laughing? It's like, yo, you can laugh or cry. I mean, we're interacting with the ideas. But sometimes you gotta laugh.
Yeah, it's silly, man. I mean, that's obviously. I mean, again, Paul Maxwell. I don't have any beef with the guy. I actually like some of his material. Like I said, I checked out some of his other material, and particularly some of the philosophical stuff. I thought it was very interesting. He's a very sharp guy. Much success to him. And we're just saying that he has some blind spots. You know what I'm saying? I think that he has some blind spots, as we all do, and we're just engaging his ideas. He says he's an ideas man. We're engaging his ideas, and kind of showing where some of those blind spots are, so that hopefully people can glean from it and say, hey, you know what? Maybe I can, check some of my blind spots too, and be a better Christian for it.
And to be frank, until he does some broader, wider reading, I hope that he never makes any other videos dealing with cultural issues in regards to ethnicity again. I'm just being frank. I think that would better serve his channel, because I think it's a hindrance, not helpful. And I know that he's not a pastor per se, but there should be an element of a pastoral concern, I do believe, as we engage in apologetics and things in social media sphere and all that. And just ask yourself, Paul Maxwell, is this video that you put out, does it have the heart of a shepherd to it? Now, someone will be like, well, Vocab, you did this and you did that. No one's saying anyone's perfect and that. Well, no one's saying that. But you got to ask yourself, like, does it have the heart of a shepherd? Like, imagine, Paul Maxwell, that you were a pastor of a church, that somehow you found yourself the pastor of a church that was 80% minorities, as you would say, 70% black. Ask yourself about that. Now, you may say, well, that's because they think wrong and all this, but ask yourself the way you approach it and all that. And I get what you're trying to do to an extent. That's the way you're going to speak on social media. But it didn't strike me as like I have any empathy or pastoral concern as I approach this theological and very challenging issue. And I hope that the future.
Yeah, that's I think that's a great point. I mean, the Bible tells us that our conversation should be seasoned with salt. We ought to be gracious as we're communicating, and going back to, for example, the part where he's being very flippant or maybe just dismissive about white man's religion talk and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there really is a number of people out here, Vocab, who for that idea that Christianity is white man's religion is a stumbling block between them and the gospel. It's not something that we can just treat flippantly. And if you're not really engaged in individuals like that, you don't know anything about it, you either just need to avoid that, or just, maybe get in proximity of some folks, who could, give you some insight as to, what you're, trying to tackle from afar, so that you'd be more informed when you do address these issues. I mean, I would love to talk to this guy, Paul Maxwell. You know what I'm saying? It'd be dope if he responds to you, man. I'd love to talk to the guy and maybe compare notes on some things, because I think that, he has a lot to offer the body of Christ, and I hope that he takes time to, gain a better perspective or broaden his perspective, so that, it's not, his ministry isn't hampered by some of these, needless detours to reason. Yeah.
And with that, we end saying to Paul Maxwell, to everyone in the live chat, to YouTube, to the evangelical world, to everybody listening and watching this video, we end with this: read widely, not just whitely.